All right, now we want to talk about the Chinese Revolution. What's happening in China at this time? Kind of leading up or in a post-World War I era, 20th century. We talked some about this, and remember we said that part of what had happened is that China had a real push after we have this emperor who's called the last emperor, a revolt that will come, a Chinese kind of revolution that will end the rule of the emperor. We also have a leader named Sun Yat-sen who is calling for the revolution, calling for really democracy, a different style completely. To go from an emperor to democracy was a big change that he's pushing for. Part of the problem was, of course, is just having the logistics to be able to run the government of a big country like China. And so eventually, General Yuan Shikai will take over because he is a military general. He is going to impose more of a military-style government. Many people were afraid of him, and they were afraid that he was going to return China to very traditional rules and traditional views that they did not want to have. Many people really wanted significant change in China, not just replacing the emperor with a general. So this is one of the tensions. The struggle is going to continue because Sun Yat-sen is not gone. He's still around. He will end up going, after the parliament is disbanded, he goes to Japan to live. And you know, Japan gets involved in a lot of this because remember, Japan is always eyeing for expansion. Japan is building their own imperialistic state. They have learned from the West, the British and the French and the Dutch and so forth. They want to be an imperialistic power, only an Asian imperialistic power. And they're looking to the Pacific, the South Pacific, the Southeast Asia. These are the areas, China, these are the places where they want to pick up territory. And since there's conflict in China, they like to be the people that are sort of helping. Well, we'll help you out. Come over here and we will sort of protect you. We will keep you, safe, all that kind of stuff. It also then gives them, at least in their mind, some credibility to get more involved in what's going on in China. Right? Well, anyway. So eventually then Japan will make demands on China. China is quite weak. Things are falling apart. On the one hand, Japan had taken in the last emperor, and on the other hand, Japan takes in the guy, who was to be president, the new president. So it's kind of strange. Obviously, they're not interested in the political views of either of these guys, but they're interested in the fact that they have some political influence in China, and that will give the Japanese credibility to say, hey, we're just over here trying to restore the emperor to power. We're just over here trying to help out this guy you ran out of the country. And, it's like we're being the nice guys here. Well, Japan had 21 demands that they made that would give Japan greater control over China. Obviously, that does not go over well in China. Yuan blocks some of these efforts, although they're too weak to block everything. And Japan is just gaining lots of power. China is losing lots of power. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. Another thing that begins to happen in China is many people decide, you know what, maybe we do need to be more Western in our approach. After all, we see it works for the West. And we also see that the Japanese have become more westernized, and it seems to help them out. So Japan kind of becomes a model for the Chinese to say, you know what, here's what maybe the way we can do this. We can remain Asian, we can remain Chinese, but we can take these Western ideas and use them. So China is in turmoil. Intellectuals in Peking begin what's called a new cultural movement. This is an idea to try to bring Western ideas into China through the classroom, through education. And those ideas come to be represented by a little saying, a little slogan, Mr. Sci and Mr. Day, Mr. Science and Mr. Democracy. In other words, this is what they wanted from the West. Science, technology, that the West had of machinery and weapons and military things and so forth, and democracy, so that, they would get rid of the emperor, and that kind of approach. Most people in China were illiterate. Most people in China were not educated. And they were not really interested in this intellectual movement. They didn't probably even know about it. If they knew about it, they didn't think it was for them. New education approach. I'm just worried about feeding my family. I'm just worried about getting my crops in and so forth. I don't care about what these guys are doing in Beijing or whatever to sort of modify things. I'm worried about what they considered more pressing and practical concerns. Having a job, bringing in the crops, keeping your family fed. And so this becomes a divide in China over the sort of educated elitists who want a revolutionary change that's democratic, and then the other people who feel that they don't have a part in that. So who's going to come in and speak to them, do you think? What's the other big movement of the early 20th century in China? Communism, yes. And so you're going to have communism that's going to address some of their concerns. Well, after World War I, in 1919, the German territory in China does not give it back to China. They give it to Japan. Why? Well, appeasing the Japanese, making friends with whatever you want to call it. They see the Japanese as a growing imperialistic power. If we give them some land over there, that probably earns us some friends, points. Many students begin to demonstrate in Beijing about, why are the Germans giving Chinese territory to the Japanese? That's China, and we should decide what happens to it. Well, by 1920s, it's clear that there are two big groups that want to take control of China, and they have very different approaches. One's called Donald Trump, and the other one's called Bernie Sanders. No, it's not that. One is called Sun Yat-sen, and the other is called Mao Zedong. In other words, you've got the communist Chinese, and you've got this nationalistic party of China that has a very different approach. All right? So what happens then is when other communists hear that there are communists in China, I'm talking like communists in the Soviet Union, in Russia, because they just had a revolution, they get very excited about this. Hey, they want to join our club. So the communists in China are quite radical at Peking University, or Beijing University be called now. They begin the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. The CCP, in turn, asks a guy named Lenin, pictured here, the guy from Russia, the guy who's done the revolution in Russia, for help, advice. What advice can you give us of what to do? And in 1923, they begin to work against warlords in China to bring about this revolution. All right, we're going to pause there for now.